Welcome to the Workspace Master Class. For those of you who have joined in the previous episodes, thanks for coming back and watching the fourth episode, where today we're focusing specifically on VDI. And really, with VDI, what we've learned is there's more than one way to do VDI. Many of us are very familiar with doing VDI as an on-prem implementation, which is still relevant and still valid. But what we want to do is also talk about the on-prem implementation, as well as talking about different ways you can implement VDI in the environment. Now, like I said, this is the fourth episode, and all of these master classes on Workspace have been recorded, and they're available on demand for anyone who's missed the first three or want to go back and rewatch something that we presented previously. So to get there, you go to citrix.com/events, you look in the Workspace Masterclass webinar, and then at the very bottom of that screen, you're going to see On Demand. And in that On Demand, you're going to see the different Workspace Masterclasses across the different years that we've been presenting these. So feel free to go back in there, take a look at some of the old content if you're interested in some of those topics. And this one will be out here very shortly. And with that out of the way, let's take a look at who the experts are for today's session. So first, we have Matt Brooks, who's a technical marketing architect. He's pretty much done about everything at Citrix, whether it's virtual apps and desktops, he's done the networking thing, he's done the endpoint management thing. So he has covered a lot of different areas when it comes to Workspace. We also have Mayank Singh, who is another one of our technical marketing architects who has an extensive background in the virtual apps and desktop environment, started specifically on the HDX side, especially HDX 3D Pro, a lot of the graphical implementations that have been done, expert in those topics. And then, of course, myself, lead architect within the Workspace. I've been around a really long time, pretty much have covered just about everything. So that's who we got on tap for today. So it should be a really good session. So let's get into this. Now, like I said, this is the fourth episode. And what you might have missed in the last one. So in the first three, what we did is we built this entire infrastructure, this entire workspace environment where we added virtual apps and desktops, SaaS and web apps, local mobile, content, browser apps, integrated all this with unmanaged and managed devices. Now, specifically on the last episode, what we did is we focused on just one of those endpoint devices, and that's Windows 10. We looked at how we could integrate a Windows 10 endpoint into this entire workspace, allowing endpoint management to be able to manage Windows 10 endpoints. How do we incorporate content into Windows management with Citrix files via the content collaboration? So we took a look at a lot of those different aspects. Now this time, like I said, we want to focus specifically on VDI. We want to go back to the virtual apps and desktops, because so far in the Workspace Masterclass, in the very first episode, we integrated an on-prem virtual app and desktop deployment with site aggregation. And like I said, if you're unfamiliar with site aggregation, you can go back to the very first masterclass, or you can go to techzone.citrix.com. A lot of great technical information out there, and there's also in the Learn section under Tech Insights, you'll see a video out there that explains site aggregation in detail, so you can take a look at that as well. But when we think about VDI, what we're looking at is, this is where most of us are at. We have storefront and we have our applications. And this is what a lot of us have deployed. This is what a lot of us are good at. But there's something major that's missing from this picture. And that thing are SaaS apps and web apps. These are becoming much more important in every employee's life, every worker's life. I mean, I think every day, I do use, Word, PowerPoint, and Outlook, which I'm using within a local VDI session, but I could use them as a SaaS app, but I'm using them as a local application. But I'm also using many different SaaS applications throughout the day. So these are not integrated into my storefront environment, which becomes a challenge because now it breaks the whole overall user experience that I have by having to go to different places to be able to get access to all my applications. So what we want to do is not only aggregate these applications, because it's kind of simple to aggregate these. I mean, it'd be very easy in a virtual app and desktop environment to just publish content. And one of those contents could just be a link to like Workday or a link to Salesforce. Then you'd have those integrated in there, but we want to go beyond just publishing content because, who cares? It's just a favorite that you could easily add into a browser. What we want to do is we want to incorporate single sign-on, we want to incorporate enhanced security, we also want to incorporate website filtering within these applications. So let's take a look at what I mean by this. So first, the basis for incorporating these applications is going to be in Workspace App. So if we have this content available, if we have these SaaS and web applications available, we want to try to provide this native experience. And by native, it means it's not a published application. It's not a published browser running in some data center somewhere. We want it to actually run locally on the endpoint. And within Workspace App, we have all these different engines. We have an HDX engine, we have an analytics engine, content collaboration, all these different engines. The HDX engine is for Citrix virtual apps and desktops. It's HDX, it's the ICA protocol that's allowing us to get that good user experience. So that's one of the engines. Another one is in there, the very top one is the embedded browser. So we have an embedded browser engine within Workspace App, and we're going to be able to leverage that because it's going to give us this native experience. When you launch a SaaS application, it's just going to appear locally on your endpoint within this embedded browser. But because this embedded browser allows us to control it, we can have the admins apply different policies, lock down the environment and analyze what the user is accessing to make sure it's safe. So we're going to leverage this whole embedded browser within Workspace App. So let's look at the architecture. This should be very familiar to all of us. Anyone who's using Citrix virtual apps and desktop should be very familiar with its architecture, where you have a user who's external, hits Gateway in your DMZ, connects a storefront, gives you a list of your applications, and then your delivery controller is managing the access to all these different resources. And all this information stored in the site database, a SQL database, stores all the configuration information. So what we want to do is we want to expand this a little bit. We want to utilize Citrix Workspace, a cloud service that will allow us to incorporate web apps and SaaS apps. So you might hear, people say SaaS and web, web and SaaS, or they just might say SaaS. Basically, how I differentiate SaaS and web is that a SaaS application is hosted by a third party, Office 365, Salesforce, Trello, Workday, all those different apps that you access externally from your data center. Whereas a web app is somewhat like a SaaS application, but it's something you're hosting internally. It's something you host within your own data center, something that you're in control of. So you're in control of those web apps, but you're not really in control of the SaaS applications running out there via other software vendors. So what we want to be able to do is incorporate both of these things, both of these resources into our virtual apps and desktops environment, integrate these into Storefront. So the first thing we do is we allow the Citrix Workspace, the workspace experience running in Citrix Cloud, to be able to utilize our on-prem Active Directory. And with this, we utilize a cloud connector. So this cloud connector is just this little agent that runs on a server within your data center. And when it starts up, it makes this outbound connection to Workspace. So this means that we don't have to open up a bunch of firewall ports on the internal external firewall, that are coming inbound. All this, this control channel goes over 443 and it's outbound. So once that control channel is available, Workspace can then talk to certain systems within the internal network, namely in this instance, Active Directory. So within the Workspace, what we're going to do is we're going to create applications for Office and a web application. We'll create an application. We'll create an app for a SaaS app as well as for the web app, and then we assign those applications to a user or user group using our on-prem Active Directory. So there's no need to synchronize Active Directory up to the cloud. You don't have to have this hybrid model of AD. You just keep running AD on your internal network, in your on-prem environment. And with that cloud connector, the Workspace is able to talk to your Active Directory domain, and you can publish those applications to those Active Directory users and groups. The next thing we do is we need to synchronize this configuration down to the delivery controller, because we want to continue to use Storefront and the delivery controller We need these applications to be part of that environment. So we're going to run this synchronization utility on the delivery controller. It's going to take this configuration information that's running in the cloud and pipe it in to our site database. So all that information is now going to be contained within the site database. So when we look at what happens when a user connects to the environment, they're going to hit gateway and authenticate. They'll get the storefront. Storefront's going to talk to delivery controller and say, hey, what resources does this user have access to? Database and the controller are going to come back with all of the applications, not just the Windows and Linux apps and desktops, but also the SaaS and web applications that are being delivered via Citrix Cloud, Citrix Cloud services. So now, when a user wants to launch, in this instance, let's say the user wants to launch a SaaS application. So you go ahead, you're in Storefront, you select that icon for the SaaS application. Storefront sends that request to the delivery controller. The delivery controller now contacts the gateway service running in Citrix Cloud. So this is a cloud version of your on-prem gateway. It's managed by Citrix. It's a service that you just access, that the delivery controller is going to access. So delivery controller sends that request to the gateway service for this particular user for the SaaS application. Now it's going to use a SAML authentication for this. So it validates you are who you say you are, and it's going to create this assertion, this fact that I have a valid identity to use this application. So the gateway sends this assertion back to the user, and the user Workspace app presents this assertion to your SaaS application. Now the SaaS application has to verify that assertion with the device that created it. So it's going to go back, contact the gateway service. It's like, hey, is this assertion true? Has it been modified? Has it been tampered with? No? Okay. This user has been authenticated. They now have access to Office, to our SaaS application, in this instance, Office 365. So that aspect now runs within this embedded browser on the endpoint. So we're not running a published application. We're just running this locally via Workspace App. And like I said, this is all using SAML-based authentication, using that assertion token that you configure within the SaaS application. Now the second part of this is the web application. So we just looked at the SaaS application. But okay, actually before I go on to that, we had, I mentioned the Tech Zone before. We had this whole Tech Insight video on access control for SaaS applications, and it goes much more detailed onto how this actually works. All the different microservices that are happening, how is that assertion being passed through. So if you need more information on how access control for these SaaS apps works, take a look at the techzone.citrix.com. There's more information there, and I believe we talked about the SaaS application in episode 1 of the Workspace Master Class as well. So there's a lot more info there too. All right, now web apps. So I got a little ahead of myself before, but now let's talk about web apps. Again, same situation. User hits the gateway, gets the storefronts, user applications. I select the web application. That request goes to the delivery controller. Delivery controller, again, makes the request to the gateway service. So the gateway service is going to send the launch token for that particular web application back to the user. The user makes the connection to the gateway service. That gateway service is now going to bridge this SSL connection to the web application. But the gateway service has to get through the firewall. And we don't want to force you to have to open up all these different ports. So what we have now is a gateway connector, similar to a cloud connector, but a little different. So this is basically an appliance virtual machine utilizing Gateway. So what we really do is just dump it on your hypervisor of choice in your on-prem environment, give it the IP, boot it up, give it the IP address, connect to your cloud environment, and it's synced. It creates that outbound channel to the Gateway service specifically for your organization. So now the Gateway service is bridging this connection between the user and the web application. So we didn't have to open up any firewall ports. Very similar to the Cloud Connector, being able to get across the DMZ and the two firewalls you have there. So all this communication now happens, but again, this is running within the embedded browser on the endpoint. There is no virtual application, virtual Chrome, Firefox, Edge browser that's running on a virtual app server. It's running as an embedded browser on your endpoint. And so when we looked at SaaS applications, we were doing SAML-based authentication. When we do web apps, we're looking at either it's basic, Kerberos, or forms-based authentication. So for those of you who know anything about web development, which I do not, so this makes no sense to me, those are just the different types of ways you can do sign-on. Okay, so we are working on we're working on another Tech Insight video, access control for web apps. So again, this will be on the Tech Zone under the Learn Tech Insight section. So, in the future, if you have questions or you want more detail on how this is set up for the particular web app, that's where you want to go, is take a look at the access control for web apps. I don't believe it's out there yet, but it will be soon. All right, so we've talked about single sign-on. The second thing we wanted to talk about was the enhanced security in the website filtering. Because remember, you can easily publish content within Storefront, but it's just an icon. It doesn't do anything for you. So we had three things that we talked about in the beginning. We wanted to provide single sign-on, enhanced security, and website filtering. So when the user launches one of these SaaS and web applications, this is the embedded browser. This is what it looks like, and it runs natively on your local device. So the embedded browser lets us do lots of different things. It lets us restrict printing, restrict downloads, navigation, website filtering. So the list goes on and on of the things that we're able to restrict on this environment, plus the website filtering. So if you think about it, most people will trust a SaaS or application. You trust Salesforce, you trust Workday, you trust Trello, you trust Microsoft and Office 365. But do you trust the content that's embedded within those applications? So here's an example of one SaaS application, Humanity, and people can put messages in there, and those messages could be hyperlinks. Pretty much every SaaS application is like this. Now, do you trust those hyperlinks? Let me ask you a different question. Outlook, it can be a SaaS application when you access it via Office 365. Hopefully we all know not to be clicking on links from unknown people and that we're not sure what they're for. Same thing with any SaaS application. So we want to be able to look at those links before we direct the user to it. We want to try to protect the user and protect the content they have on that device and protect the organization. So we want to filter and look at those links before we send the user on their way. So there's a lot of different app protection policies that we can set within the environment. And again, there'll be another Tech Insight video on app protection policies, in the Tech Zone that's going to go into a lot more detail on all these different policies that we can apply to the environment. So stay tuned for that as well. All right, so I spent a lot of time, unfortunately, talking about access control and how this all works. But let's now take a look at the demo of how this actually gets set up. All right, so I'm in my environment, logged into my Citrix Cloud account. And the first thing I want to do is make sure I have resources. These are the SaaS and web applications that I'm trying to incorporate into my storefront environment. The next thing I need to do is install the sync utility. So you install this on the delivery controller. You go ahead through this very, very, very complex installation, which is next, done. And you're all set to go. So some of the information you have to put in here is, what is the URL for your workspace environment, your personal workspace environment for your organization? You have to give it the username and password. For a user that has access to those resources that we want to synchronize into our local environment. And then you give it the Active Directory domain. So this is just the domain name that I have running in my organization. Actually, on the username, I don't need to put the full UPN name. I just need the user name itself, and then the password, and then we'll put in the Active Directory domain. The last part of this is set up the local delivery group, or select the delivery group that these applications will be added to. And this is one of the reasons why you run this on the delivery controller, because it's going to use different PowerShell commands for that particular delivery controller to incorporate these applications. So you can see the status. It's going to make me log in via Workspace, the UI here. It's because I have a password token. I've done time-based one-time passwords, TOTP, for my environment, which I believe was in episode 3 of the masterclass. So I have to log in this way with that one-time token. So when I sign in, to be able to see in the status there, the application's being synchronized with my local virtual apps and desktop environment. And it will come up with a message saying it's done when it finishes. And this will take a little bit longer depending on how many apps you have. So it's done. I'm looking for errors, and I have an error. Illegal characters. So apparently, if I recall, one of my applications was using parentheses. So I'm going to go back into my environment. Let me just make sure first. So if I look into the applications, I believe one of them will get synchronized because it didn't, humanity was synchronized. But I'm missing OWA. OWA is what I had the error on because I had illegal characters associated with that particular application. So what I'm going to need to do is go back into the environment and change those parameters, or change the name so it doesn't have the illegal characters. All right, so let me start my browser up again, and I guess it's too bad I shut it down. Go back into my cloud account. I'm going to sign in again, since I guess I shouldn't have closed this. And then we'll go ahead and modify that particular application and then rerun the synchronization utility to see if that fixed the issue. All right, so enter in the credentials. And then once that's accepted, I'm going to go back in to my environment. Yes, I have a lot of different environments. I'm going to go back into my environment to the resources to see the applications that I have. So library, and so OWA has parentheses around it. Those are illegal characters. So now I know. Let me go ahead back in, edit the details of this particular application, and get rid of those parentheses. All right, with those changes done, I'm going to go ahead and relaunch the sync utility. All right, so we're going to do the same thing again. Workspace URL, user, password, domain name, and then the delivery group that we need to associate these applications with. So it's associated with the delivery group, but once you have this added into the environment, you can easily have those applications expanded to additional delivery groups because the published application information has been synchronized and stored within the site database. So now I can just add this and associate it with multiple delivery groups. So this is just for that initial delivery group, for the initial synchronization. But then you go into Storefront or Studio and make those changes. So synchronization is complete, and scroll through. Hopefully, no errors. So a question I get a lot on this is putting this on multiple machines. You don't have to, because this is just like a one-time use thing. You only run the synchronization when you add new applications or make changes like I did. And then they're stored within the database, and the delivery controllers provide access to this. Now that those applications are in there, what you can take a look at is if you look in the description, we're utilizing certain keywords. So it's a new keyword for SSO. And when you look down in the details, you can see the application path is pointing to a gateway.net address that's going to be specific to this environment, that's going to provide the SSO information for these particular applications. So all this gets synchronized from the cloud environment and stored within our local site database. So then it's just users continuing to run, accessing all their applications from storefront within the on-prem environment. Okay, so with the sync utility done, we do have to make a change to the web.config file in storefront. So let's go through that and see what we do there. All right, so I'm on my storefront server, and I have to navigate, through Explorer, and I'm going to load the web.config file for my storefront server. All right, so there's some changes we need to make in this, and it's all documented in an article within the docs.citrix.com. So the easiest thing to do is just go out here and copy what they have and paste it into my storefront web config file where necessary. So there's all this information that's going to be help for the policies for the web and SAS apps. So to put in the right place, I'm just going to look for the external endpoint section and then paste that information that I got from that article into the web config file. All right, so it's in there, saved it. The next thing it's probably a good idea to do is to reset the IIS server just so that these changes are applied to the environment. So this will go ahead and stop and restart the IIS service. So the next time a user logs in, it'll integrate those applications. Okay, so with that now done, we can go ahead and take a look at the overall user experience. So let's go ahead and look at that demo. All right, so in this time I'm going to be on the user's endpoint machine. And so I start Workspace, and of course, I see my standard storefront UI. But now I have Humanity and my Office or OWA app. So this is running as the embedded browser, not as Chrome, not as Firefox. You can see I have a watermark. If I click on this link, of course, Pirate Bay is always a fun one to try. It's looking at the URL. It's doing the website filtering and determining, no, you probably should not be accessing this site. Very simple user experience demo, but what we saw was that the user has those SaaS applications incorporated into storefront. The user did not sign in. We utilized the embedded browser, so it was a very fast launch experience, a native experience. We had these app protection policies in place, like the watermarking. We also had it set so that you could set so you can't save anything locally. And we also were doing the website filtering all within that. So we went beyond just simply providing published content for a SaaS application. We're providing, enhanced security that you can then integrate into your local storefront environment. Now, we just focused on on-prem Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops, on-prem VDI. But the whole topic, the main topic of this masterclass episode is there's more than one way to do VDI. And with that, I'm going to turn over to Mayank, who's going to go into more in-depth details and start comparing the different ways that we can provide VDI to users. Mayank?
Let's first look at all the different ways Citrix makes available resources to your end users. As you can see, there are a number of different desktops and application types. For the following discussion, we're going to be limiting the scope to virtualized Windows desktops, and of them, 3 types: shared or hosted shared desktops, pooled desktops, and personal or dedicated desktops. Let's take a look at the Workspace Architecture diagram once again, and as you can see, the virtual apps and desktop resources on the right. As an admin, you want to be able to make available Windows 10 desktops to your users. So what are the options available to you? There are 4 options. The first one is virtual apps and desktops, the tried and true solution that users are used to. We will be calling it CVAD going forward. Virtual apps and desktop service, Citrix cloud version of CVAD, and we'll be calling it CVAD service. Windows Virtual Desktop, WVD, the newest offering from Microsoft that makes available Windows 10 multi-session images to its users. And finally, Citrix Managed Desktops, the newest DaaS service offering from Citrix based on WVD. Another way to look at this would be the evolution of Citrix's support for hosting Windows VMs in public clouds. First, we extend. You extend your existing on-premises apps and desktops environment to a public cloud like Azure or AWS with one or more resource locations and manage it from your on-premises data center. The second is hosting. The entire deployment is lifted and moved to the cloud. Third is cloud services with virtual apps and desktop service or CVAD service as your cloud management plane and one or more resource locations in the public cloud. And finally, we have Citrix Managed Desktops, a DaaS offering where everything is in Azure and the solution is managed completely by Citrix. Let's now take a look at the user experience when a user tries to launch a Windows 10 desktop made available to them by the workspace. The user is logging into the workspace and is given the option to detect the Workspace app that has already been installed on the system. Once they click already installed, they're shown the list of desktops. The user clicks on the Windows 10 desktop made available to them by you, the admin. Now we go through the standard procedure of logging in and connecting to the desktop. I'd like to pose a question to you right now. From what you're able to see, what is the mechanism in which that we are delivering this desktop to the user? Is it the standard Citrix virtual apps and desktops on-premises deployment? Is it the Citrix virtual apps and desktop service? Are we using Windows virtual desktops with Citrix virtual apps and desktop service? Or is this being delivered via Citrix managed desktops? For the user, it shouldn't even matter. To give you the answer to the question, let's look at the properties. So this, as you can see, is a Windows 10 Enterprise Edition or multi-session VM that is being delivered from Windows Virtual Desktop using Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops service. So let's talk about Windows Virtual Desktop. Windows Virtual Desktop is Microsoft's desktop as a service offering solely hosted on Azure. This turnkey solution makes available Windows 10 multi-session VMs as well as Windows 10 single-session VMs and Windows 7 extended security update VMs, which come with 3 years of extended support. The offering also supports server operating systems, Windows Server 2012 R2 and upwards. It has built-in optimizations for Office 365 Pro Plus, including FSLogix and a foray into per-machine installations of OneDrive and Teams to benefit virtualized instances of the OS. It also allows admins to use templated images as well as images that they may have created and nurtured over the years, which can be brought up into the cloud. Azure has more points of presence than its two competitors combined, and we've been told that the WVD control plane would be deployed across the globe quickly after the service GAs. The service is in public preview on Azure, and the following are the current offerings available to you as an admin to try out. Windows Server 2019 remote desktop session hosts for multiple sessions, Windows 10 Enterprise for single sessions, and the combination of the two is Windows 10 multi-session. Let's look at a demo of Windows Virtual Desktop. Go into the marketplace on Azure and search for Windows Virtual Desktop. There you'll be able to see Windows Virtual Desktop as an offering. Simply click on it. You'll be asked to provide the admin UPN, the name of the host pool, as well as a number of users that need to be assigned. You need to create a resource group, and from there you need to select the size and quantity of the operating system that you want to use. Here we're going to be using Windows 10 Enterprise for virtual desktops. And then we select the size of the machine that we want to have this operating system installed on, including graphics capable machines. Once we've got that, we provide the domain name and the admin username that we need to administer the domain. We select a virtual NEC card as well as create a subnet for this particular set of machines. From there, it's as good as done. It starts the final validation and you can create the VMs from it. All it needs after this is to have a small PowerShell script run to associate the VMs to the users. I also have created a deployment guide where you can try this public preview with Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop Service. So let's look at the architecture for Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop Service with the Windows Virtual Desktop public preview. As you can see, it's the standard setup for the users as well as Citrix Cloud, where we're using the Virtual Apps and Desktop Service. But on the resource side, you'll see that everything lives in Microsoft Azure. We're using the Windows Virtual Desktop multi-session VM, and it is inside its own Windows Virtual Desktop tenant. This desktop is cloned using Citrix MCS. We'll also need a cloud connector installed in Azure to be able to contact this VM. Please note that you will need to sync your Windows Active Directory with the Azure Active Directory in your subscription using Azure AD Connect. If you would like access to the deployment guide, you can find it in the useful links at the end of this presentation. Taking a quick look at the different licenses that are available to the users. Using Windows Virtual Desktop, Citrix is going to be providing a desktop as a service offering called Citrix Managed Desktops. On release, we're going to be providing a turnkey solution where you will get a single bill from Citrix that includes the Azure capacity that you're going to be using to provide your users the VMs that are running in a Windows Virtual Desktop environment in Azure. This includes Citrix Gateway service and Citrix Workspace App technology, as well as management and monitoring of these machines. All you need to do as an admin is to tell us the number of VMs that you want to create and the size of those VMs, as well as who the users are that we want to associate with these. And you should be able to have Citrix create those VMs for you and make them available to your users. Let's quickly look at the feature set that is provided by Citrix Managed Desktops. There are multiple deployment options, including a non-domain joined option where you can have users that are not joined to the domain be able to access them. The workloads are Windows 10 and Windows Server 2016, and they'll be available in multiple VMs sizes as well as in all the regions available when WVD is GA. While we're talking about it, let's take a look at a quick demo of the Citrix Managed Desktops admin console. When you log into your Citrix Cloud account, you'll see a Managed Desktop tile. You can click on the tile and you'll be taken to the administrative console for the Managed Desktops. It's mainly built on this list of catalogs that are available for you as an admin to use. It lists the master images that are available to you to use to make this catalog. As you can see, you can build an image or you can import an image. If you select one of the images that are already there, you can see which catalogs it's assigned to and how many VMs are using it. For user access and authentication, the workspace URL is provided and you can manage the users from here. For network connections, we show the list of VNets that are being used for this particular catalog. To create a catalog, simply click Create Catalog. You have multi-session, static, and random as the type of machines that are available. You can select the OS image and the network connection that we want to use, and provide the region that are going to be there as well as the name. We can select from a list of different types of workloads that are available or create a custom one. If you want an even simpler option, simply click Quick Create, provide the size of the VM, the region, and the name of the desktops and how many you want, and you're off to the races. Once the catalog is created, you can add subscribers by clicking Add Subscribers and Manage Subscribers. Here, you can search for the list of users from your AAD group. It's simple as that. Clicking on Details will give you the details of the particular catalog. Desktops and Apps gives you the resources that are made available from this catalog. Machines shows you the machines that are running, and you can also do power manage right from here. For the monitoring pieces, let's look at the Monitor tab. Here you can get the desktop usage for all of the catalogs in different time periods. What we show is the peak concurrent sessions, the number of powered on machines, and the number of powered down machines. If you hover over one of those, you can actually see in time how many machines are powered off and powered on. If you click on desktop launch activity, you'll be able to get last month's worth of desktop launch activity data. So you get all of these things in one single console. The other great thing about Citrix Managed Desktops is that we do apps as well. So you can also deliver just applications from Windows Virtual Desktop machines. Let's take a step back and look at Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops, our OG offering. Let's actually not do that and take a look at the deployment architecture. The whole deployment is managed by IT. This includes all the device management, the management of the access via the storefront and the ADC, as well as the Virtual Apps and Desktops controller, which is managed by Studio and Director and requires licenses and database management, as well as managing all the resources that are being provided to your users. The solution could be hosted on premises or in the cloud. Now let's look at Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop Service. The service differs from the Virtual Apps and Desktop deployment, as in that all of it doesn't need to be managed by IT. With Citrix Cloud, a number of services are available as always-on cloud services. This means that customers no longer need to install or even properly size or scale them. Citrix ensures that the cloud services are always up to date, no upgrades or patching is ever needed, and as the customer implementation grows and shrinks, the Citrix cloud services scale themselves. What is still the customer's responsibility are the VDIs and the gateway. However, customers have the option of deploying these services wherever they want, on premises, in public clouds, or across multiple locations. Deploying the VDIs and resource locations is far simpler than deploying all the other services that were there to manage the deployment. Resource locations are securely connected to Citrix Cloud with a cloud connector, a stateless machine that brokers commands between delivery controllers and the services in each resource location. Let's take a look at a demo for the Citrix Apps and Desktop service. The user now logs in to their Citrix Cloud account. Once they log in, they're able to see the different tiles that are made available to them. Let's select Virtual Apps and Desktop Service tile. This tile loads up the Virtual Apps and Desktop Service, and here you can see the workspace URL for the users. If we click on the Manage tab, we'll be taken to the Management console, which is the studio in the cloud. Here, you'll be able to see the same console that you're used to, which contains the different machine catalogs. Here we're using a Windows 10 multi-session image, as well as it shows the different delivery groups that are available. It has the same set of policy controls that you would be familiar with, so that you can manage the environment as you see fit. Let's take a look at the Hosting tab, where it's clear we've added Azure as the host. In the Monitor tab, we can see the sessions that are connected. If you click on them, you should be able to get a listing of all the sessions that are available, and we can drill down into individual sessions just as you would do with the normal director. You can see the applications and processes that are running in the session, as well as we are able to get to the session detail, where you are able to see machine details and perform operations on those machines as well. So having seen all the different options that are there, which one should you choose? Well, as in most cases, it depends. But we're here to show you at least a few ways to figure out what is the best one in your current situation. So let's take a look at this flowchart. The first question that you need to ask yourself is that, do you want domain joined workloads? If there are specific workloads that are not domain joined, then Citrix Managed Desktops is your answer. The next question that you should ask is whether you are working with only cloud resources. If yes, and these are only Windows 10 or Server 2016 VMs, then Managed Desktops is again the option for you. If the answer to either of those questions was a no, then we need to see if the deployment that we have has any specific compliance requirements. If yes, then the Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop on-premises is the solution. That's also the case if you're trying to use AppV or SCCM. In all other scenarios, we would suggest that you look at using the Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop service for your deployment. Let's also look at the effort required from IT to manage these particular deployments. In this grid, we can see that Virtual Apps and Desktops requires the highest amount of effort by IT. Virtual Apps and Desktop service takes away the requirement to configure the broker, manage the storefront. Citrix Managed Desktops also takes away the management of the resources. And the final option is a Citrix service provider based offering where they manage everything for IT. So based on how much the customer wants to manage the solution, you could choose the right solution for yourself.
All right, thanks, Mayank, for the overview of the different ways that we can do VDI. Really, it comes down to, like what Mayank said, is what do you want to manage, and that's going to help you decide which approach to take. Now, we want to turn the focus a little bit, still on VDI, but on a specific aspect of VDI, and that is the networking concept. And for that, we're going to have Matt go into more detail on Gateway. So there's a lot of interesting things, especially when we go to the Gateway service, that Matt's going to be able to fill us in with.
So we talked a lot about the different types of desktops that Citrix provides, and then different ways that they integrate and are hosted in the cloud. Now we want to take a look at how we access those apps and desktops. So first we want to talk about the Citrix Gateway service. This is the Citrix cloud-hosted service that can provide access to those virtual apps and desktops for users from anywhere in the world. We also want to talk about the Citrix Intelligent Traffic Management Service. This works in conjunction with the Gateway service to direct users to the nearest POP at a location throughout the world as well. Then we want to talk about a specific use case with Citrix Gateway and Virtual Apps and Desktops, where it provides HDX proxy access through Citrix Cloud to a on-premise resource location to access those virtual apps and desktops. So we'll take a look at the admin experience for that and the user experience. In a traditional on-prem resource location, the environment uses Citrix Gateway to access the virtual apps and desktops. And Citrix Gateway has been a workhorse for years and a very secure and scalable solution. Yet the reality is, this is an appliance that needs to be managed. It needs to have power. It needs to be updated. It needs to be configured. And along with that comes the need to access it through the DMZ. So that requires stateful firewall rules and monitoring of that access. This is a conduit to the sanctity of the company's internal network from the internet or VPN, as the case may be. So that needs to be managed. And also for the external facing aspect, there's a public IP address requirement, and there's also DNS requirements, so additional things that need to be managed. And then, not to mention the need for multiple sites to provide high availability. Typically, the environments need to be replicated in 2 or more locations to ensure a very high level of reliability. So that's more equipment to implement, install, manage, and then obviously for the failover aspect, there's more protocol implementation requirements, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous failover. So what would make our virtual apps and desktops environment easier to deploy and manage is to remove the network complexity by using a cloud-based service. So Citrix Cloud Connector creates an outbound channel to the gateway service and the workspace, allowing Workspace to authenticate users with Active Directory and aggregate our virtual apps and desktops. So that when a user connects to a virtual app or desktop, the virtual resource establishes an outbound connection to Citrix Gateway service. The Gateway service proxies this connection between the end user and the resource. So this solves our original challenge. Now we no longer have a network device to manage. This is taken over by Citrix. We no longer have the public IP address or the firewall rules or the need to maintain HA sites. The Citrix manages this and provides POPs globally, which we'll talk more about. And then it also provides that ITM service that's going to resolve, the FQDN users are trying to access to direct them to that nearest gateway POP. And of course, it's the same experience for the user. They're oblivious to the fact that their connection is traversing the cloud as opposed to a on-premise gateway. Now let's talk about the specific use case where Citrix Gateway service provides HTTX proxy for those virtual apps and desktops. So user's device is going to install Workspace app on their device, and they'll connect to their workspace. The workspace will establish that connection with Cloud Connector that we talked about. It'll do authentication to Active Directory and also enumerate the apps available through communication with the delivery controller. Now, let's take a deeper look at the networking aspect here. So first, when you create your cloud, you're going to have one of 3 regions that it's assigned to. There's Americas, EMEA, and APAC. And now that one of those Citrix Cloud regions is going to communicate with that Cloud Connector on your premises. So there's a few details behind this. First, the hosting requirements. This simply runs on a Windows Server virtual machine. It installs as an executable, and it spawns up several services. So those services are used, by a variety of workspace services such as endpoint management, content collaboration, or of course the Citrix virtual apps and desktops. There's also some network requirements. So for the connectivity from the Cloud Connector virtual machine in the resource location to Citrix Cloud simply requires TCP port 443 outbound. And so that's the only outbound transport layer requirement. It does also require some domains to be accessible, such as the Citrix cloud.com domain in the event that you are doing outbound URL filtering. But then, of course, once the connector is installed on that virtual machine, you have to obviously maintain the power for it, keep it running in your rack or wherever your resource location is hosted. But the actual services running on that virtual machine are managed by Citrix, and they're evergreen. So we manage the upgrade of those services, and we do it through what's called a canary process. And this is one of the main reasons, well, one of several actually, that we ask you to install multiple connectors. Those multiple connectors provide high availability, and particularly when we're doing upgrade of a connector, we'll actually verify. We'll do one at a time, and we'll verify that if for any reason a connector fails to come back up, the upgrade process stops. The administrator is notified, so it really mitigates the risk of any loss of connectivity. So now after the Workspace app is connected to the Workspace service, they see their apps available and they select a virtual app or desktop. It's going to download that ICA file that contains details for the session, and within that there's an SSL host that's going to represent a gateway, Citrix Gateway service that Workspace app needs to communicate with. Now, when it tries to resolve that, the authoritative DNS name server is going to be the Citrix ITM service. So the Workspace app is going to communicate with ITM, and it's going to return the public IP address of the nearest gateway service POP. So the way it does this is that it utilizes the ITM predictive DNS service. Again, it's authoritative for those gateway service domains, and it's replied to at one of nearly 100 sites around the world. And so the way it does that is that it follows its typical DNS query flow. The endpoint is going to communicate with a recursive name server. It'll talk to one of the 13 root servers to find out the top level domain, whether it's .net or .com. And that top level domain server is going to direct it to a Citrix ITM name server. And so ITM is going to return that public IP address to reach the closest gateway. And it's going to do that through one of 4 of those global name server FQDNs that are backed by, again, nearly 100 sites, so that wherever that query occurs, anywhere in the world, it's going to be a quick response. And so now, if we have that public IP address of the nearest Citrix Gateway to access from the Workspace app, our next step is going to be to contact the Gateway Service POP. And so the user is going to establish a connection with the Gateway Service POP, and in a token that it carries, including its authentication information, its STA, it's going to carry a resource location identifier. With that, the Gateway Service contacts Cloud Connector and asks it to establish a reverse proxy connection to that particular Gateway POP. And then through that, the Gateway is going to communicate with the VDA, and it'll establish that end-to-end session so that the virtual app or desktop is active and running on that endpoint. So the Gateway service is hosted at one of 12 plus POPs. There's 12 in existence today across Azure and AWS clouds, and at Citrix Synergy, a couple more were announced that are soon to come. And so having those around the world are going to allow the Workspace user to connect to the nearest one, which is going to provide a low latency session. Getting access to one of these POPs, closer to the endpoint is going to reduce that latency and obviously optimize the user experience. So the Citrix Gateway service, in addition to some of those benefits of being managed by Citrix and alleviating the network requirements, provides several other benefits. It includes elastic scalability, which basically means that when you have the need for more capacity, you can obtain that on demand. So if your industry has seasonal requirements or what have you, that's easy to implement with the Gateway service. It also provides consumption pricing, so you basically pay for what you use. And then there's that least management overhead. We talked about obviously those details of managing kind of the gateway on-prem are no longer in place. So then the IT admin resources used to manage those can be freed up for other activities. And then obviously this is going to, Gateway service is going to, as we show, round out that end-to-end solution as a cloud service. Again, it's fully managed by Citrix, so that means 25 by 7 by 365. And we provide 4 nines of availability. And then there's this global presence that we talked about, right? Those POPs around the world. So getting to those POPs, again, is going to be managed by Citrix ITM. The way ITM does this is by maintaining a global database of basically connectivity information down to the service provider level for locations around the world. And it does this by billions of users visiting the sites of Citrix ITM customers and them having them download a lightweight radar script that does some basic connectivity checks to these other locations. So on top of those billion user queries, there's tens of billions of additional queries that they make that build this database, this daily updated database of response time, of latency, of loss across the internet, that allows ITM to have this incredible knowledge base to direct your endpoint based on its IP, based on its autonomous system number, based on the service provider, to direct it to that nearest gateway service pop. It's going to first make that query to the ITM name server. It's going to respond with the site before it has any detailed knowledge of one of the available sites. So then that office will navigate through the different autonomous systems in the internet. And once it hits the site, it will download this radar script. Now, after the initial couple seconds after the initial page download, so there's no interference with performance, that script does a query of the other sites. And if during that time there was congestion, say in the first path that it took, it'll recognize that. It'll identify there's a change in the bandwidth, change in the latency, and it'll report that back to the ITM database. So then on future queries from that autonomous system, it could be the same office, it could be the same customer, a different customer, ITM is going to recognize that now there's a better path, and it'll respond with a public IP of site B for that same internet service or that same website, for example. So that's a really high-level overview of how ITM builds this massive database and ultimately how it directs those Citrix Workspace endpoints to the nearest gateway service pop. Now let's take a look at HCX Proxy and go through the admin side of the setup and then the user experience of what they see. We'll begin our admin journey to configure Citrix Gateway Service integration for HCX Proxy on a dedicated Windows Server 2012 R2 machine. We'll go ahead and open Internet Explorer. Then we'll navigate to citrix.cloud.com. Here we'll find a login screen, and at the bottom we'll see a link to sign up and try for free. If you're new to Citrix Cloud, you can see real quick, if we open that link, you have to enter a bit of information and then you're able to create an instance to try it out yourself. We've already created one, so we'll go ahead and enter our login credentials here. We'll enter our password. And then we'll go ahead and log into our Citrix Cloud instance. And the first place we'll go to is the resource location. Here we'll see that we have a single cloud connector installed. And as we talked about earlier, it's very important to have two or more. And we actually have a notice about that here. So we'll go ahead and click plus connector to download and set up another connector. And we'll see it's a pretty light download. We'll do run and it'll take a few seconds to download. It'll launch a prompt and do a quick connectivity check just to see if we have some internet connectivity. Then it'll give us a sign-in prompt. We'll click that and it'll notice that we're already signed in. Then it'll go ahead and start the installation. It'll provide some details about what's being installed while that's taking place. Then after a few seconds, it'll go ahead and start a connectivity test. This will take a bit longer, so we'll put this off to the side. And then we'll go ahead and look at our documentation around this a bit. We'll go to docs.citrix.com. And then first we'll go to Citrix Cloud. And if we click under About Citrix Cloud, we'll see the Secure Deployment Guide. Here you'll find details that you may want or need to share with your security team, your security officer, or your SecOps. There's details about encryption key management, like our use of TLS 1.2, or if you scroll down, you'll see details about port connectivity, that it's 443 outbound, and if you have internal security zones, these are the internal port requirements, pretty typical for domain join machines. And if we navigate down to resource locations and cloud connectors, we'll see additional technical details down here. So we'll see things like the supported 80 functional levels, system requirements such as, it runs on 2012 R2 or Windows Server 2016. So here we can see our connectivity test is complete. So go ahead and close that. We'll navigate back to Citrix Cloud section here. And we'll do a refresh all. So we'll notice that we'll have an entry for this, but it won't be up yet. It's still doing some checking, if you will. So what we'll do is to expedite that, and for good measure, we'll go ahead and do a reboot. So we'll get that started. And while that's coming back up, we'll navigate to our delivery controller. Here we can see we have a couple of machine catalogs created. One is for a 2012 Windows 2012 Server OS, and another is for 2016. And we have a couple of corresponding delivery groups. Pretty straightforward implementation. We'll notice that we don't have any storefront stores configured, but we could. So you may want to keep one in place for internal connectivity, or you could also keep one in place for external connectivity through an on-prem gateway if you chose to. But obviously, really the goal here is to eliminate the need for that, right? We're going to provide connectivity through Citrix Gateway service in the cloud. But the key takeaway here is that the delivery controller is not aware of how you're connecting to it. We have to create that reverse proxy tunnel with the cloud connector, and then we'll see in a few minutes for the configuration on the cloud side. We'll just connect to this delivery controller, and that's it. There's no other config changes required in your environment. So we'll go ahead and connect back to our virtual machine running Cloud Connector. And so now that it's coming back up, one thing we want to take a look at is the services. We'll see that Cloud Connector spawns the creation of several services. And so not all of these are used by only Citrix apps and desktops. These are used by other Citrix Workspace services as well, such as endpoint management or content collaboration. So not all used at the same time, but all need to be installed, and the Workspace service that's in use figures out which one it needs to call at the time. So that completes our installation on this virtual machine. And the last thing we want to point out here is that you'll see that while there's multiple services, it is set up as a single program. And if you do need to repurpose this machine or reinstall it as a cloud connector for another environment, very straightforward to redo. You just do an uninstall, do a reboot, and you're able to reinstall the cloud connector as needed. Now here back in our cloud connector section, again we'll see that we're still working on that connectivity. This will take a few minutes. So we'll go ahead and get started with our workspace configuration. First, we'll notice when we navigate to the configuration, there's a workspace URL. By default, when you have your cloud instance created, you'll be assigned a random string of alphanumeric string. And obviously, this is something you probably want to change so it's easier for your users to remember. And this is your unique subdomain on Citrix Cloud. So we'll go ahead and leave that. You'll see that it takes a few minutes to change if you do change that. The next thing we want to look at is our service integrations. There's two that we need to have enabled. First is Gateway, and the other is Virtual Apps and Desktops on-premise sites. So here we're going to go ahead and click Add Site. We'll leave it as Virtual Apps and Desktops. Click Continue. We're going to select My Resource Location with those cloud connectors that we configured. And then we'll enter our delivery controller and do Discover. And after we enter our username and password, I'm going to click Continue. So it'll take a minute to reach out and try to communicate. And now we've identified our delivery controller. So we'll go ahead and click Continue. And we'll verify our Active Directory connection here. We'll also continue to use the Gateway service. It'll identify how many days we have left in our setup. and then it'll review the configuration. We'll go ahead and save and finish. Then after we've completed our integration successfully, we'll see a notice here that the site feature is currently disabled. So we can click here and navigate back to service integrations. Once we have a site available, we're able to enable virtual apps and desktops on-premise. So go ahead and confirm we want to enable that. And that's it. We have our 2 checkboxes: success to the integration that's been saved, and then integration with the CVAD sites. Now we can go ahead and navigate to our workspace. So we'll go to workspace-demo.cloud.com. We'll enter our username and our password. So first thing we'll notice that we have apps, but we don't have desktops available yet. So that'll show up eventually. One thing we can do to kind of kickstart that is if we navigate to our library, what we can do is find one of our apps we have. Here I have a SAS App Humana configured. And if I go ahead and configure domain users, for example, go ahead and provision that off. Then we'll go ahead and log back out of our workspace. Enter our password. Then once it comes up, we'll see that we now have our desktops. We'll select a desktop, and we'll see that that's coming up here. So now what we're doing is we've downloaded the ICA file. Our workspace is connecting. We see that we launched that successfully. So now we want to go ahead and we're going to open an ICA file similar to the one that we just downloaded, and we'll take a look. We'll see that the SSL proxy host here set to this FQDN, and we'll go ahead and do an NS lookup. We're going to set the query type to startup authority. So we'll add that in. So we'll see that it resolves to ns1.cidaccess.net, and this is one of the ITM FQDNs we talked about. This shows that query for the gateway is being resolved by the authoritative name server with cidaccess to direct our connection to the nearest gateway service. And finally, if we go back to Citrix Cloud, we take a look at our resource locations. We'll just verify that, in fact, our second connector did come up. It's green. And so we can see with gateway service, it's very easy to integrate your on-premise site and take advantage of all the benefits of using Citrix Cloud. Thank you for your time.
All right, so we've seen quite a bit. We've seen how we can expand our on-prem virtual apps and desktops environment to incorporate SaaS and web apps. We've also looked at numerous different ways that we can do VDI, just in addition to the on-prem ones that we're used to. From the user perspective, they're not going to notice. And I think that's really the key. The person who's going to notice is the admin. It all comes down to the question of what should the admin manage? What do we want the admin to manage? Do we want them to manage the entire thing, or do we just want them to manage, the apps and desktops themselves, the things that the users are actually going to be using? And then we ended up with Matt talking about this whole gateway service concept. Why deal with trying to manage networking devices, public IP addresses, firewall rule changes, global deployments, fault tolerance, and all that, when there's a lot of functionality as part of the whole gateway service, how it can be integrated with your on-prem virtual app and desktop environment as well. Utilizing a lot of the intelligent traffic routing capabilities of the Citrix ITM intelligent traffic management that Matt talked about. So quite a bit that was over, we talked about regarding VDI. So next quarter, when we come back for the next Workspace Master Class, what we're going to be taking a look at is identity. What is your primary identity that you want to use to access this entire environment? We have a lot of identities. Each of us have many identities for different applications, but with this focus that we're going to have in the next quarter, we're going to show you how you can first, determine what your primary identity is going to be, securing that primary identity, and having that primary identity get you access to everything else within the workspace environment. And so that's going to be Q3. Again, like I say, always topics are subject to change based on maybe something new or exciting that's going to come out in front of that, but identity is actually a very interesting topic. So feel free to go out there and register, because I know the link is available already. And with that, I believe we have some time for some questions.